The goal of everything I do as part of my 60 someday project is to make you wiser. I want to help you think in a higher quality way about your life, not by telling you what to believe, because I really hate when people do that, but simply by challenging conventional wisdom. That has always been my goal for myself. As a human being, I want my brain to perform at the highest level I'm capable of. And what I've learned along the way is that becoming wiser is not so much about learning the most important facts, but about seeing through the most seductive lies. As far as I can tell, false certainties are the source of more human disappointment and misery than any other force in the universe. And perversely, they are often the ideas put forward with the highest levels of confidence. In fact, when I hear someone pushing an idea with maximum conviction, my first thought is that it is probably wrong, or at the very least, not 100% right. I know that's not always the case. That's just how I react. Anyway, here are 20 very random things you might want to keep in mind when you encounter the know-it-alls of the world, the kind who talk like they have everything figured out. It's not because I think I'm right about everything, because I definitely don't think that. I just want you to hear the flip side of positions most people accept unquestioningly. Okay, here we go. The saying life is short gets said so often that people assume it must be true, except that, as far as I can tell, it's not. Life, human life, our Western version of life, is incredibly long. Of course, the perception of whether life unfolds quickly or slowly is relative. There is no absolute standard measurement. But it seems obvious to me that the typical human life unfolds over a very long timeline. If you compare our age at time of death to that of other animals, we are in the top 5 to 10% of all species on Earth. Among land mammals, we are actually right around first place. To make it personal, I'm 64 right now. I have very clear memories of the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s. The world was so different then. I was a fully grown man with children way back in the 90s, just as cell phones and personal computers were becoming common. And without piling on all the boring details, I've had so many amazing, unexpected experiences in the 3 decades since then. And guess what? I still have 20 or so active years ahead of me, as far as I can tell. Unfortunately, I feel like when people say life is short, what they really mean is, I can't believe how much time I wasted. The simple mathematical truth about your decades and decades on this planet is that you have lots of time for many different starts and stops and restarts. Your biography isn't a single story, it's a library. Number two, you have very limited control over the direction your life will take. I was born in 1961, so I want to address this issue by talking briefly about three other men who were also born in 1961: the hockey player Wayne Gretzky, the movie star George Clooney, and the former president of the United States, Barack Obama. Those three guys are my birth year cohort, so to speak. Obviously, they all became much more successful than me if you measure success by fame or wealth. Now, some might say I could have achieved the same things they did, maybe if I tried harder or made better decisions, but I don't agree. Just take the Wayne Gretzky example. The first time he appeared in his local newspaper, it was as a 9-year-old who, at 4 feet 9 inches tall and 80 pounds, had scored 372 goals playing against kids 2 years older than him. Long before he could truly form a grand ambition, life was pulling him along in a very specific direction. And I'm sure I could have said the same thing about George Clooney and Barack Obama if we had records of them at the same age. I don't believe this next statement fully, but I think it captures a part of the truth. The world is a machine that turns your DNA into a biography. Number three, fairness is impossible. The most irritating complaint you'll ever hear in your life is the no fair complaint. It's irritating when kids say it, and even more irritating when grown-ups say it, which they do all the time. If you've ever worked at a round-the-clock company as an employee, you'll hear the people on the day shift complaining about the laziness and incompetence of the people on the night shift. And the people on the night shift will be saying the same thing about the people on the day shift. Something in us longs for justice, but the truth is there is no such thing as absolute equality of work contribution at our jobs or in a domestic partnership. Think about it. If you and one other person were given shovels and told to transfer a pile of dirt from the driveway onto the back of a pickup truck, it is impossible that you would do an equal amount of work if you measured it right down to the milligram. In every situation where fairness is expected, one person will always do more and one person will always do less. 100% of the time. Maybe by a little or maybe by a lot, but the division of labor will absolutely never be equal. If you think, I know basic fairness when I see it, well, you don't. Research by Michael Ross and Fior Sicoli at the University of Waterloo way back in the 1970s showed that if you ask each person in a couple how much of the housework they did, the combined total will add up to more than 100%. It's like one person says, well, I did 55% of the work, and the other person says, well, I did 65% of the work, making a total of 120%, which of course is not possible. You will always overestimate your own contribution. So the big question is this: are you going to be the type of person in life who does more than their share or less than their share? Or to put it another way, will you be a giver or a taker? Those are really the only two options, because precise, absolute mathematical fairness is impossible. If you want to be one of those people who does more, because no one wants to be a freeloader, remember that getting it right, so doing 50% of the work, will probably feel like you're doing something like 70% of the work. Number 4, effort does not equal reward. One way we imagine we can control the essential unpredictability of the world is to believe that we will get out of life what we put into it. It's so appealing. And like most of the things on this list, it's kind of true sometimes. But there are absolutely no guarantees. I own a successful business, but that is not the thing I put the most effort into in my life. From 2010 to 2020, I worked on establishing myself as an artist, a painter and performance artist, to be specific. I held myself to very exacting standards. I worked at building relationships in that field, and I spent money on marketing. It was the hardest I have ever worked on something. I pushed myself to make high quality, original work without compromising. But I also aspired to financial success too. And while I'm proud of the paintings and performances I produced, the entire project can fairly be described as a financial disaster. That's not fun for me to say, but it's inarguably true. Number 5, planning does not guarantee results. The old saying, failing to plan means planning to fail, is just not always true. In fact, I prefer a different saying: man plans and God laughs. The law of unintended consequences is a law and not just a suggestion for a reason. A certain amount of chaos is baked into all the basic systems that govern our lives, from physics to chemistry to biology. What can go wrong will go wrong, as Murphy apparently put it. Does that mean you shouldn't plan? Of course not. Working through various scenarios, often labeled in business as pessimistic, realistic, and optimistic, can help you consider all the possibilities. In my career, I've owned a $10 million a year business since 2002. We haven't had a budget since that very first year. I watch other, more intuitive indicators to keep on top of the financial health of the business. Basically, all I look at are payroll and dividend payments. If we can make those, then everyone will be happy and we're doing what we're supposed to be doing financially. When we add new business, I do a budget to make sure that my pricing makes sense, even if things don't go the way I'm expecting. When it comes to success, though, I value improvisational skills over planning skills by a lot. Number 6, objectivity is impossible. The most natural belief is that we can trust our own observations, that we see things as they really are. But that simple truth turns out to be highly questionable at best. As human beings, we are full of biases that distort our judgment. Psychologists have identified 98 of them. One that I think is particularly dangerous is known as naive realism. This is the unconscious belief, most often seen in politics, that we and the people who agree with us are seeing the world as it really is, while the people on the other side are either stupid and uninformed or greedy and cruel. It doesn't take too much imagination to see how that mutual contempt is stoking a lot of friction between right and left, liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans, etc. Both sides think they've got it right and see the only solution is for the other side to come over to their perspective. And they hope to do that basically by insulting them rather than actually listening to their concerns. Number 7, you do not understand yourself. We start a lot of sentences with the words "I want," in spite of the fact that we don't really know what we want. The best illustration I've ever heard of this was shared by Malcolm Gladwell in his book Blink. Known as the Columbia Poster Study, it really was ingeniously designed. Subjects were brought into a room and told that they could choose any poster they wanted to keep for free. Half of the people were told to carefully analyze and write down the reasons for their choice before deciding, while the other half were told just to choose quickly based on their own instincts and to leave with their poster right away. A few weeks later, researchers followed up with both groups to see who had the poster hanging up on their wall. Overwhelmingly, it was the group who chose quickly who were more likely to have their posters on display at home. The people who had to defend their decision were less satisfied with their choices and hadn't put up their poster. Both groups would have said they knew what they liked when they made their choice, but only one group would have been right. Number 8, a true understanding of current events is impossible. At the time I'm recording this, the war in Iran is going on. You can find experts who believe the invasion was a total success and others who believe it was a total failure. So, what is the truth then? Well, there is no single truth. Even if you were there on the ground in Iran, you would have a very hard time figuring out what is going on. The situation is chaotic, it's changing hour by hour. Plus, Iran is a gigantic country of 92 million people. The experience of conflict is different throughout those various regions. And forget about what you're seeing today. The scholarly consensus on this war, what happened and why, will change continuously back and forth for decades after it's over. It's the same with politics, sports, entertainment, and everything else people care about. Everything human beings do as a group is insanely complicated. I'm not saying you shouldn't have opinions. I'm just suggesting that you should probably sprinkle a little humility on those opinions. Oh, and this doesn't just apply to wars. The gossip you heard earlier today about the friend of your friend is also based on half-truths and blind guesses. Number 9, higher education does not lead to higher income. People go to insane lengths and undertake extreme debt to get a 4-year degree from a prestigious school. This was never clearer than in 2019 when the Varsity Blues college admissions scandal came to light. I don't know if you remember this, but it was revealed that dozens of wealthy and well-connected parents had fraudulently conspired to get their children into elite universities. At the center was an admissions consultant who put together a scheme involving fake athletic profiles, bribed coaches, and manipulated test scores. The universities involved included Stanford and Yale. The scandal became especially high profile because it implicated celebrities like Felicity Huffman. She eventually pleaded guilty to paying to boost her daughter's test scores and served a short prison sentence as a result. Another celebrity, Lori Loughlin, was convicted of paying $500,000 to have her daughters falsely recruited as rowing athletes. She also served prison time. You see what's happening here? These people and many others believe that getting their children into schools they didn't deserve to attend would get them a level of success they also probably didn't deserve. But the idea that you can buy success like that doesn't even work. One famous study by Stacey Dale and Alan Kruger compared students who were accepted to similar sets of elite and non-elite schools. When they compared their later career outcomes, they found that students who attended more selective colleges earned about the same as those who went to less selective colleges. And this isn't just a warning to parents, but to anyone who goes into a ruinous level of debt to study at a prestigious school, when they could have saved a lot and earned just as much, it turns out, by attending a less prestigious school. Just to make this personal, I have 2 university degrees from a good school. My business partner has a diploma from community college, yet he makes more than me most years. Because guess what? Being really, really good at your job is way more important than where you went to school. Number 10, saying yes to one good thing always means saying no to other good things. We like to frame most of our decisions as choices between right and wrong, good outcomes and bad outcomes. But it's almost never that simple. More often, saying yes to something good means saying no to one or even several equally good things. When I decided to do an arts degree at the University of Toronto back in 1981, it meant not going into the radio and television arts program at Ryerson Polytechnical Institute, which had been my plan up until that point. I don't regret that decision, but it radically altered the direction my life took and cut me off from what would probably have been some amazing experiences. Number 11, power is an illusion. Power is typically thought of as the capacity to reward your allies and punish your enemies. But in reality, very little of that rewarding and punishing actually happens. Where power usually shows up is not in the actions of the powerful, but in the minds of those who interact with them. They modify their behaviors based on expected consequences, not on actual ones. Let me explain with a personal story. Back in 2002, I walked away from, or was fired by, depending on whose version of the story you believe, the company I had founded 8 years earlier. It's important to understand that though I was the founder, I only owned 6 2/3% of that company. Anyway, the end of the relationship turned into a total mess and ultimately a lawsuit. Now, keep in mind, in this lawsuit, it was me, a truck driver's son, against a company owned by 20 wealthy, well connected investors. To make a long story short, I won the lawsuit, I set up a new company, and I put my old company out of business 18 months later. Obviously, I had some kind of power, but it couldn't have been the old fashioned version that we associate with money and connections, with punishing and rewarding, because I had almost no ability to do any of that. And while I'm on the subject of power, I want to bring up another very different example. In October 2017, journalists revealed accusations of sexual assault against Harvey Weinstein, who was a very successful Hollywood movie executive at the time. I'm sure you've heard about it. It was the origins of the Me Too movement. After the police got involved, he was fired from his own company and sentenced to 23 years in prison. His fortune, estimated to be worth at least 250 million, did nothing to shield him from the consequences of his actions. But I think the saddest lesson from the Harvey Weinstein story is more personal. His power, unfortunately, allowed him to coerce women into having sex with him. But it didn't get him the only thing that really matters when it comes to sex, which is enthusiastic consent. All his immense, undeniable power got him was reluctant acquiescence from the women he desired. That just seems so sad to me. Like, here was someone who believed that power could bring him happiness, and it turned out he was completely wrong. Number 12, don't expect to get paid for doing what you love. Probably the most common career advice you'll ever hear is something along the lines of follow your passion. The idea is that you should take something you really enjoy and turn it into a paying job. How delightful. The problem is that the world can't actually work that way. I mean, if everyone tried to follow that advice, our society would soon cease to function. Our economy just doesn't need millions and millions of DJs and fashion models and neo pop art painters. We definitely need some people doing those jobs for sure, just not millions and millions of them. What we do need are accounts receivable clerks and garbage collectors and welders and lots of other jobs like that. Are we supposed to wait for people to develop a passion for those activities so they can turn them into fulfilling careers? I'm not trying to talk you out of following your bliss, by the way, but I am trying to suggest that there are really good paychecks waiting for people who decide to not follow their dreams. That's all. Number 13, lying is useful. To illustrate this point, I'm going to use an extreme, if familiar case, the archetype of the lying politician. When it comes out that a politician has lied, people act indignant and offended. We see it all the time. YouTubers and Instagrammers and TikTokers rush to find clips of the individual completely contradicting themselves on 2 or more occasions. It used to be called gotcha journalism, as in gotcha, and everyone acts shocked. But in my opinion, acting shocked looks kind of dumb or even immature. Why do these politicians have to lie? Are they all morally bankrupt individuals? No. Basically, they lie because they are doing an impossible job. They are trying to build a consensus among a mass of people who all have 98 biases. People who don't realize they have 98 biases, in fact. Every citizen is convinced they see the world as it really is, and a leader has to surf those waves of contradictory certainties. The only conceivable way to navigate that ocean of chaos is to craft multiple versions of reality and use them with different audiences. So how are you supposed to judge a politician then? We think we're supposed to make a list of all their promises and then hold them accountable. But that approach, which no one actually does, of course, would drive you crazy. The best way to judge a politician is what most people actually instinctively do, which is kind of a vibe check. Some people do this when they say, which guy or girl would you rather have a beer with? What they're doing is saying that they would trust that kind of person to make the best decision in the mainly impossible circumstances they find themselves in. But Please don't embarrass yourself by acting shocked when they're caught lying. It's literally their job. Number 14, hypocrisy is a sign of moral progress. We all appreciate consistency, people whose words align with their behavior. Nobody makes a list, let's face it, of their all-time favorite hypocrites. Sometimes the hypocrisy is really gross, like the case of Kouri Richins. I don't know if you've heard about her, but prosecutors say she poisoned the father of her 3 children and then wrote a book aimed at helping children cope with grief. Like, wow, that's cold. Now, I'm not qualified to make a mental health diagnosis here, but that seems psychopathic. But the run-of-the-mill scandal, the religious leader who preaches purity until he's revealed to be having an affair, that to me is different. We all aim high and fall short. Failing to live up to our ideals isn't a knock against the ideals. Again, like with lying, people get very judgmental about others doing something they do less obviously themselves all the time. From my perspective, hypocrisy is simply evidence of moral ambition yet to be achieved. Number 15, romantic love is a mental illness. Romantic love is often held up as the loftiest of human sentiments, but that's not what I see. There is clearly delusion involved, usually the delusion that you've found the one, and that delusion can spawn mania-like behaviors. When someone says, I'm just not feeling the chemistry with a certain person, what they're really saying is, I'm just not feeling the insanity I associate with true love. We can become intensity junkies and mistake that for true love, even though intensity in itself is actually neither good or bad. For some people, that mania actually works out really well. It helps them to bond with the right person. But for so many others, the mania helps them to bond with the absolutely worst person. I just read yesterday about the trial of a man who tried to push his wife off a cliff and a woman who poisoned her husband with fentanyl. I don't know what role romantic obsession played in bringing these two couples together, but I'm guessing that their connections were filled with passion at some point. And somehow it connected them with a person who was comfortable ending their lives. Number 16, there's no such thing as unconditional love. Actually, the good news on this one is that unconditional love actually does exist. The bad news is that it's only for babies. Babies get to behave abominably and they're still loved by their parents. But not long after the infant stage, love starts to come with conditions. Love must be earned, even if you get a free pass from time to time when you fall short of expectations. But if you think that means you can earn love from someone you adore, like that woman who friend-zoned you by working hard for it, well, I'm sorry to report it doesn't usually work out that way. Number 17, all people are mixtures of selfishness and unselfishness. People are more unselfish than cynical people believe, but they're also more selfish than idealistic, non-cynical people believe. There are no purely unselfish people. When you allow people to think that your motives are purely unselfish, you're lying to them. When you see someone who you believe is purely unselfish, you're lying to yourself. Does that mean we're all dysfunctionally idealistic about ourselves and others? Not at all. We do everyone a favor when we hold up unselfishness as an ideal counterbalance to our natural selfishness. I think the most useful application of this truth is when we see unselfishness in others, just take a moment to consider how selfishness might also be at play. Not so we can be terminally cynical, but just so we can get a clear view of what's really going on, because they're always both there together. Number 18, there is no such thing as heaven on earth. This is another one of those things that no one actually claims to believe, but that everyone seems to assume on a subconscious level. Human beings have always and will always live together in somewhat chaotic, somewhat unjust, somewhat infuriating social groupings. I'm pretty sure that's the best we're capable of. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to improve, but we should stop thinking life would be perfect if only. Because if only is never going to happen. Number 19, successful businesses, like unsuccessful businesses, are built on irrational optimism. We'd all like to believe that great businesses are easy to identify right from the beginning, but that's not how it seems to me. There are always lots of good reasons to believe a venture won't succeed. 20% of new businesses fail in the first year, and 50% fail by year 5. If you were being logical about the odds, you would say no smart person should ever start a new company. The odds are just too discouraging. The thing you will blame the unsuccessful entrepreneur for later, however, will be the same thing you praise the successful entrepreneur for: ignoring the odds. And finally, number 20, moral standards change over time. We like to think that the ideals of good behavior are eternal, but again, as far as I can tell, they just aren't. A few hundred years ago, it was considered perfectly respectable to watch a person being burned or flayed or impaled alive in the public square. I think we'd all agree today that was an objectively sickening practice, even evil, yet no one judged their neighbor for participating. So I don't think we've finally reached a stage where these atrocities are a thing of the past. Someday we might even think eating meat was just the worst thing. And you know what? I'm having a steak for dinner tonight. So I'll probably look pretty bad in, I don't know, 2100, or maybe right now if you're vegan. Oh, and I know I said I had 20 brutal truths for you, but I do have an additional bonus one. Number 21, nobody wants your advice. Now, I totally get that this might seem like a weird thing for someone like me to say. After all, isn't that exactly what I'm doing here? Handing out advice to anyone who cares to listen? Well, no. At least I hope that's not what I'm doing. I really hate when I see others doing it. Sometimes we give out advice when someone we know faces a challenge, but sometimes we do it kind of compulsively because we think someone needs to make a change and we can't resist telling them exactly what we know they should do. Regardless of your age, I just want you to think about whether you've ever seen anyone make a positive change based on your awesome advice. Or have you personally ever followed someone else's advice? Maybe once or twice, probably along the way. But mainly, people are recommending to you a course of action you've already considered and decided not to try. So the next time a friend comes to you with a problem, try listening, asking questions, and expressing empathy, but without offering advice. It is really hard, but just try to keep in mind, no one wants your advice. No one. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me here. That was a lot. This is the longest video I've done yet. If you feel totally exhausted or confused, do not under any circumstances give this video a like. It will only encourage me to do even longer ones, and that's not good for either of us. Anyway, bye for now.